All right. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go into the continuation in this series we've been doing. This is the part 9 of Do You Know the Father and the Son? And also it is part 4 of My Sheep Know My Voice. Now I know that this is kind of going on and on in this series, but you know what? This is probably, and I hate to say this every series, but this is one of the most important things that we need to be dealing with, is that if you don't know the Father and the Son, then what's the point of all the rest of it? Because it's all about that relationship. And so I'm going to give a brief recap, and then we'll see how the recap then leads into the teaching. Let's remember that it's the Father that reveals the Son. We learned that in Matthew chapter 11. And the Son that reveals the Father, to whom they choose, how they choose, and when they choose. And that's really important, so that we understand whose role is what. So we're not trying to always jump into the role of thinking we have to be the one sharing the Father and the Son and revealing that to everybody, because you can't. Now, once it's revealed, you may be somebody that helps facilitate them getting to know the Father and the Son, or helping someone to find where the information is so that they can learn about the Father and the Son, but it's different than feeling it's your job to reveal, which goes, by the way, completely against all Christian missionary work that thinks it's their job to go around, beating everybody in the head and making sure that they all get the Son and the Father revealed to them. Now, if you're going to do missionary work and show up someplace, set up camp, feed people, and then have the people ask you, why are you doing this? And then you say, because of my relationship with the Father and the Son. And they say, well, who are they? That's different than you going there saying, hey, I'm happy to feed you as long as you sit down and listen to this sermon. And then you have no choice because you're thinking, well, I'm starving to death. I'll listen to anything. So it's a different sort of thing. So we understand that the Father reveals the Son reveals the Father. In doing so, he gives the person eyes to see, ears to hear, and hearts to receive. We did talk about no one having seen the Father and no one having heard the voice at any time of the Father, specifically and directly. We also talked about the idea of making sure that we're careful. I didn't mention this last week, but I haven't mentioned it in a couple of weeks. But we have to be careful of what the base is and what we try to make fit into the base. Because I do have people that will always ask me things like, well, what about this verse? Okay, well, is that verse the base that now everything fits into? Or does that verse need to fit into some other verse that is actually the base of the idea? So in my opinion, see how I worded that? Make it clear. In my opinion, if Yeshua says no one has seen the Father or heard his voice at any time, everything else to do with seeing the Father or hearing the voice has to fit into that. That, to me, is the base. Now, when we say things like, well, what about when Yeshua got mikvahd and the dove and well, now all of that has to now fit into what Yeshua told us. And we did try to answer those questions in previous, I think maybe part 3 or part 4, we dealt with that, okay, of this teaching. So if you want to know more about it, you'll have to go back to those parts. But just realize for some of you that this may be the first part you're hearing, and you hear me say something as audacious as, well, no one at any time has ever heard the Father's voice, nor seen his form. That's not audacious of me to say that. I'm simply quoting what Yeshua said. Yeshua said, no one except me has ever seen the Father, nor have they ever really heard his voice. However, then we started understanding that it's not an either or, but it's an and type of thing. But there's a thing called the voice. Yeshua talks about my sheep know my voice. My sheep know my voice. And other sheep I have that are not of this fold, they're still my sheep, even though they're not of this fold, and they hear my voice. Whose voice? The Father's voice or the Son's voice? The Son's voice. And then we got into this whole series that's within the series on this voice thing, and we came to see that the voice can represent the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, as a means by which the Father and Son speak to us. In which case, you're hearing the Ruach and you're not hearing the actual literal voice. But you're hearing the one speaking forth or the way the voice could be speaking to you. The same thing we also learned that the voice can literally be talking about the Son himself. That the Son, in a sense, is the voice of the Father. He's the spokesman for the Father. All the thus said Yahweh's is the Son speaking for the Father. All the time that Yeshua in the flesh came, when he was walking in flesh, that was the voice of the Father. He said, everything my Father says, I say. Everything my Father says to do, I do. Everything he says to say, I say. Everything he says to do, I do. He's the voice representative of the... If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And then, after making this connection, we explore this connection between the Ruach, the voice, and the Ruach. we now come to this part here where we're going to continue in exploring this so that we can understand, as we take a deeper look at how this voice, understanding about the voice, helps us to know and have a relationship with the Father and the Son. That I believe we're in studying this out, and this is all new revelation for me. I never really studied the voice this way before. But understand that in my studying it, what I'm seeing is, and again, let me say that again, what I am seeing is, you may not see it. Doesn't make it right. But what I'm seeing is that this voice, if we start to understand it better, also will help us to relate to and understand and know, because know is relational, know the Father and the Son. And that's ultimately what this is all about, is making sure that we know the Father and that we know the Son in a relational way, in a very intimate relational way. So we're going to begin today in chapter 8 of Deuteronomy, in Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 8, which has two of the most critical verses to our ministry in it, in verse 2 and in verse 10. I'm assuming that's in chapter 10 and verse 12. I'm sorry, we're not going to get to that one, but the one in verse 2 in chapter 8. And so we're going to begin in verse 1, though, and I want to read about 20 verses here leading into the voice. Now, as we do this, I hope you're paying attention. I'm giving you instructions on how I want you to do this. As we read all these verses, and we're going to read about 20 verses in this chapter, in another chapter we may read 8 or 7 or whatever it is, I want you to be thinking about, even though the word voice may not be there until the very end or somewhere in the middle of it, how this is about understanding what the Father and Son want us to know about them so that we know them and relate to them. What did we talk about in some other parts of this series? One of the things we talked about is, if you knew me, you wouldn't have said that. If you knew me, you wouldn't have done that. If you knew me, you wouldn't have thought that about me, right? Haven't you had those experiences when someone's done something, you're like, I thought you knew me better. And so as we read this section in Deuteronomy 8 and other sections that we're going to be in Deuteronomy here, all today at least we're going to be in Deuteronomy, I want you to be thinking about, if we knew him, if they knew him the way he wanted them to know him, they wouldn't do the things that we find out they did in Deuteronomy. But they didn't know him, not in that relationship. You want to know why the ones died in the desert? The ones who died were the ones who did not have the relationship that was necessary to make it into the land. Because without the relationship, they did things they shouldn't have done, that they wouldn't have done if they had the relationship. Because they would have known better. Not knowledge known, relationally known. My Father would be very disappointed with me if I do this, and if I do this, he is not going to play games with me. He is not going to let me get into the land. See, it's just like children with parents, right? Children with parents, we tell them, if you do this, you're going to get this result. You know what? But we as parents, we don't carry through. We don't follow through all the time, and the children then push the borders because we're weak in following through. Guess what? Yahweh's not weak in following through. He's going to follow through. That's one of the things we can count on and trust in him, is that what he says, he means. And what he says he's going to do, he does. And so, if we know him, and know that that really is how he is and who he is, we know that about the promises of all the good stuff. We also know that on all the promises of the reaping and sowing of the bad stuff. Because we would know him. Let's begin here in verse 1. Guard to do, we're in chapter 8 of Deuteronomy. Guard to do every command which I command you today, that you might live, and shall increase and go in, and shall possess the land of which Yahweh swore to your fathers. And you shall remember that Yahweh Elohim led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you, to prove you, to know what is in your heart, whether you guard his commandments or not. So just there in verse 1 and 2, he says, look, guard you every one of these commandments that you have today, that you might live. So you need to know that this is part of your relationship. The Father gave you these instructions so that you can live. And see, if you really knew that, nobody could ever tell you that the commandments were wiped out, done away with, and they were burdensome evil things. If you knew. Not if you just had knowledge of, but if you knew, had a relationship with. He says, guard and do these that you might live and increase and go in and shall possess. See, ultimately, this is not about knowing and not even about blessing. Ultimately, it's about going in and possessing. Hopefully we understand that. It's about going in and possessing. And so isn't that ultimately what we're looking for? Is going through everything we're going through so that we can receive ultimately access in. so that we can possess what was being prepared for us beforehand. And so he's telling us that the commandments need to be guarded in order to have that happen. So that's part of our relationship with him. We have to understand that and know that our Father means what he says here, that he's giving us a path in. And he's giving us instruction on how to get there, and that's guarding to do every command which I have commanded you today. And then he says, and look, as part of this process is that before you can get into the land, there needs to be a cleansing that goes on, a process of sanctification, a coming out of, a cleansing. He says, and you shall remember that Yahweh did all of these things to you for these 40 years in order to first and foremost to humble you. Because he needs you to be humble when you relate to him. You can't relate to him in a full of yourself, self-sovereign sort of way. Last night, as we do often on Friday nights, we were watching a Bible story, a Bible movie. And we were watching one of the Joseph versions, one of the Joseph movies. And at some point, one of the brothers got in the face of Joseph. And Joseph looked at him. Now, this is when Joseph is now the head. He's second in command. And Joseph said, nobody talks to me like that and lives. Be careful what you do. And right away, they're bowing and scraping in there. See, they understand the power of the person in authority. We don't. We don't. We don't treat anybody with respect, let alone anybody actually in authority. We probably don't even treat ourselves with respect. And here in these movies you watch people, even Joseph as second in command, when he goes out at the end of this movie to see Jacob who's coming, he looks over to the Pharaoh for a nod before even going down. He respected the authority. And see, there's an order, there's a protocol. And so Yahweh says, in order to be in relationship with me, you can only do that if you are humble. Because there is only one authority. And anything less than humble means that, if you're not humble, anything other than humble, I shouldn't say less than, but other than humble, means that there's still something in you that has authority. Is it making sense? If you're to be humble, you have to give up all authority over yourself and submit it to something or someone. And so the whole journey in the wilderness, first and foremost, was to humble us. And so, guess what? I believe in type and shadows. I believe that this is a type and a shadow of what's to come. The greater Exodus from the previous Exodus. And so I believe we are all walking in a wilderness per se, so to speak, and that the whole point of the wilderness we're walking in is to humble us. And so you cannot be humbled and still say things like, but. By the way, I did a really great analogy with that, which I never thought of before, which is such an obvious one, like the sheep and the goats. Sheep go, meh. What do you think of that? Meh. The goat goes, but. So be careful when you're doing the old but thing. And that usually sounds like, but I don't like that. But I don't want to do that. But that's not fair. See, that's still not humbleness yet, because you still want to insert your opinion, your preferences. The humbleness has not been a completed process yet, when you have a lot of that still but. Continuing. He says he was to humble you and to prove to you to know what was in your heart, whether you guard his commandments or not. So he wants to prove and know what's in your heart. That's part of the relationship. You need to know what's in his, but he's always demonstrating and showing you what's in his. Okay? There's never a problem with that. We read throughout scriptures where his heart is at. But he wants to know where yours is at. He wants to put you through situations and circumstances where you will physically demonstrate by your actions where your heart is at. Now, I know some of you are going to say, but he knows my heart, he knows everything. Yes, that's true. But he also is in charge, and he gets to do it the way he wants to do it. And he, for whatever reason, wants you to actually show and demonstrate, not just have him search your heart and look into, through clairvoyance or something and know what you're thinking and what your heart is. He wants to actually have you manifest it visibly in the three-dimensional world in what we call actions, works, effort, doing something. And so he puts you through circumstances and situations so that he can see you actually do what is in your heart, so that he can know what's in your heart. And that's why these trials come upon you. Trials come upon you so that you have opportunity to demonstrate in this three-dimensional world we live in what's in your heart. Whether you panic or trust him, whether you try to fix things yourselves or trust him. It's all about what you do and how it relates to your relationship with how you know him. If you knew him, you'd know that everything that happens to further you along the path of becoming like him. If you knew him, you would know that everything that comes upon you would be just that is what is common for man, and that a way of escape would be provided. If you knew him, you would trust and fully believe and not even have to think about the fact that all things work for the good, even if you can't see it. If you knew him. But if you're still doubting, if you still have fear, then do you really know him? See, it's part of the knowing process. So he led them through this wilderness to test and to prove, to know what's in their heart. What? To know whether it's in their heart to guard and keep his commands, which, by the way, tells him what? Whether or not you're going to be obedient and submissive. And whether or not you're going to trust that those commands do what he said they're going to do. They're going to keep you safe, and they're going to bless you. Now, I don't think there's anywhere in Scripture specifically where he says that it's going to change you from what you are into what he is. That's something I've come up with. That's my inference from when I read everything. I see that, even though he's never actually said that. But I see it as the vehicle that transforms you from this ugly mess that we are as human beings into the perfection that is Yeshua, and the perfection that the Father is. So if we want to be like them, he gives us a way to do it. He gives us a path. He gives us a vehicle, a means to get there. So that's my interpretation. Now let's continue. He says, and he humbled you and let you suffer hunger, this is verse 3, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, to make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes forth from the mouth of Yahweh. So again, you see this is part of getting to know him. He used a physical thing, this manna, that they had to wait for every day, and they had to follow instructions about and get the double portion on Friday and all that kind of stuff. He gave them that so that they could get to know him, and they could get to know that it's about living on every word that comes from his mouth. In other words, relying and depending on him. So this is part, again, of the process of getting to know him, how he operates, how he does things. Continuing, he says, your garments did not wear out on you, nor did your feet swell these 40 years. So again, you're seeing now his heart. Could you imagine your garments not wearing out for 40 years? I know some of you have children. You wish the garments would last even 6 months, let alone 40 years. And your feet didn't swell? Or all that walking and all that traveling and everything else? That's his love. That's his heart. That's him trying to get you to know him. He says, thus you shall know in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so Yahweh your Elohim disciplines you. This is part of getting the relationship now. So you're trying to get to know him. He is going to be a disciplinarian. So stop acting surprised when he disciplines you. Stop acting surprised when he uses a human being to discipline you as his voice, as his spokesman. His shepherds are his spokesmen. His teachers are his spokesmen. His prophets are his spokesmen. So when a prophet went to Israel or to Judah, they were his spokesmen doing what? Giving them discipline sometimes, or warning them about the discipline that was coming if they didn't shape up. He still uses other human beings today to do that. Hopefully I'm doing that at some point. If I can get out of the way and allow him to use me as that vessel, that's what I hope to allow him to do when it's needed. So if you get discipline from me, I'm hoping you receive it as from him, because it really should not be from me. Meaning, I should not have a personal angst that I'm trying to, or issue. It's simply me being a vehicle or a vessel willing to allow him to speak through me to you something corrective. I'm not even talking about one-on-one. I mean, even just from the microphone. But it may be one-on-one. You have to be open to the fact that what I'm giving you may not be from me, so don't get all mad at me. It may be from him. Because that's what he does. He uses people to be his voice. Moshe was his voice. Then Joshua was his voice. All the prophets were his voice. Let's continue. He says, thus you shall know in your heart. So we got to know in our heart. We got to know in our heart that as a man disciplines his son, Yahweh disciplines us, which is why the heart of the matter teaching is so critical, because the heart is the matter. The heart is the matter. As a matter of fact, there's people that contact me all the time and ask me about the heart is the matter teaching, because that's what they hear me saying, but it's called the heart of the matter because the heart is the central point of all of this. He wants to know whether it's in your heart. By the way, that's why I've always said about Deuteronomy 8:2 that it's not about being perfect. It's about wanting to be perfect. It's about wanting to be transformed into the perfection that is the Son. It says to be conformed and transformed into the image of the Son. Why? Because that image is perfect. And it's not about being that image, it's about wanting to be that image. And if you want it bad enough, you'll do everything you can to get there. Like anything else you want bad enough. Because you know, even as a child, well, the cookie was way up on that high shelf. And you know that's where the cookie was, and nobody was looking, and you wanted to get to the cookie, but you found some way to stack a bunch of stuff. You were going to get to that cookie. If you want something bad enough, you'll figure some out a way to do it. Well, guess what? Do you want to be transformed into the image of the Son bad enough? Do you know Him enough to know that that's what He wants with all of His desire, that you transform into His image? You'd know that if you knew Him. What does He say? He says, if you love me, in other words, and you can't love someone on the way He's talking about if you don't know them. Can you really love people you don't know? That you don't know anything about? He says, but if you love me, you would keep my commandments. Because you know me and you know that they're for your good and they're there for the blessings and for the protection and the transformation. He says in verse 6, therefore you shall guard the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim to walk in His ways and to fear Him. He says, look, therefore, knowing that Yahweh will discipline you, you should then be walking in this stuff and learning to fear Him because, quite frankly, you can trust that the rod is coming. And if you really trusted that, you wouldn't be doing a lot of the silly, stupid, foolish things that you do. The reason you do is because His discipline doesn't come instantaneously. In other words, you break a commandment and you get wham. See, that doesn't happen. As a child that you have, let's say you're a parent and you have a child, you know that if the child does something and you don't get to him within a certain amount of time, you might as well not even discipline him at that point because there's not a way to connect the discipline to the action. Because he's already doing something else and the kid's like, why are you doing this now? I'm behaving now. Yeah, but what you did 25 minutes ago, well, it's too late for that. Now you can sit him down and explain that that was wrong, but you really can't discipline him for something that you didn't get to quickly. It's hard. So the Abba has the same problem with us. He says, you know what? It's hard for me to connect you to something that you did when I don't give you the discipline right away, but that makes this an even bigger blessing when you can self-discipline and realize that that discipline is coming. You are going to reap what you sow. It's just unfortunately for you, it doesn't happen right away. It would be nice if it did, and I know you don't think so, but it really would because it would get your attention immediately. You'd learn your lesson quickly. But in some ways, you think, well, maybe that wasn't such a big deal. Look, I'm still moving along. As a matter of fact, things are even going even better. You know, I took that job on Saturday, and I'm paying all my bills, and we got money coming out of our ears, and we're buying anything we want. Maybe Yahweh wanted me to do this. Be careful. Don't be deceived. Don't deceive yourself with the mammon, with the false wealth, the things that look like blessings, because you can't just do it that way. You can't just do it that way. Continuing here, for Yahweh your Elohim is bringing you into the good land, this is verse 7, into a good land, a land of streams of water, fountains and springs that flow out of the valleys and hills. So what he's trying to tell you is, look, He's going to discipline you. He's going to do all these things. You should be afraid of Him. You should have a proper respect for Him. Why? Because it's worth it. Because if you do all of these things, He's going to be bringing you to a good, not just good, the word there, the Hebrew's tov, means so much more. It means good from a Yahweh perspective. Now, even in the Hebrew today, people say tov for good, and they use it for every kind of possible good. But scripturally, in the Bible use of it, He means good on a Yahweh level. He's bringing you to a tov, a truly good land. So it's worth all of this. A land filled with springs and fountains and water and hills and valleys, wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land in which you eat bread without scarcity, in which you do not lack at all, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you dig copper. And you shall eat and be satisfied, and shall bless Yahweh your Elohim for all the good land which he gives you. But you're not going to get there if you don't know him. Because if you don't know him, you're not going to obey him, you're not going to submit to him, you're still not going to be humble. All those things are relational. They're relational. But you got to know him. Let me use an example from my own life. I don't know what you feel about martial arts. I really don't care. And I'm not being insulting there. It's part of my past, okay? But in my past, and I'm talking about distant, over 30 years ago past, when I was in the martial arts, there was a respect for the sensei because we knew just what kind of bad man that man was. And I mean that in a respectful way. In other words, we knew that he knew his stuff. He had earned his position. He was every bit what he said he was. You understand what I'm saying? We knew him, and so therefore when he said, stand this way, do that way, we knew, hey, if I do exactly what he tells me to do and imitate him and try to be transformed into him, I'm going to be just as good at this as he is. Why can I do that? Why as a person, all of us, why can we do that with the chef that we want to be like? Or as a cook maybe, or the martial artist, or the musician, or the keyboard player, or the piano, or the guitar, whatever it is. Why can we start to do that for a person who has those talents? We can't do that to be like Yeshua. Why don't we have that same respect and awe that we have, your idol, and I don't mean this from a religious point of view, the person who you are awestruck by in your hobby, field, whatever you desire, if that person walked in the room, you'd be like, oh, wow, I can't believe so-and-so is here. I can't believe they're here. And then every word they say, you'd be like hanging on every word. And if they were showing you how to do something, let's say it was someone who cooks and you're someone who likes to cook and they're in a kitchen and they're showing you, you pay attention to every little detail of how they took the stuff and how they added it and when they did and how they stir. You would pay attention. You would hang on this is the guru, this is the master of this thing. Well, the master of the universe wants you to do that with him. But do you hang on his every word? Do you pay attention to every detail and say, if I just do what he does? By the way, that works in all things. If you find anybody that has what you want, if you do what they do, you'll have what they have. It does work universally. So whatever you're doing, and you know somebody out there that's doing the same thing very successfully, all you got to do is find out exactly what they do and you'll have the same success. It's not a secret. But there is one who's already been successful at what you want more than anything else. To come from flesh into uncorruptible, from corruptible to incorruptible. Only one being has ever done that, Yeshua. He was in the flesh, and now he's in the incorruptible. So there's a pattern there to be followed. If you want what he has, you got to do what he did. What did he do? We have a teaching. What did Yeshua do? What did he do? He kept everything perfectly. There's no magic to this. It's very simple and straightforward. But yet, if our heroes walked in the room, our fleshly heroes, boy, would we sit there on the edge of our seat and want to get every little nuance of every little thing that comes out of their mouth. Whatever that expertise is that you're looking for. Maybe it's business. What if it was somebody that was a relationship expert? Boy, if they came in here and you knew that they could fix your marriage and fix your relationship, you would be ready there to take notes and sit on every little thing that they said. Well, guess what? All of that's right here. It's called the Scriptures. And we need to hang on every single syllable, word, and phrase in this book. Because you know why? The whole book is his voice. It's him speaking to you. This is his voice in writing. The commandments, the Torah, I know that Rocky asked me to make sure to mention that. This is his voice. He speaks to you through the commandments. This is his voice. The word is his voice. He says, be on guard, verse 11. Be on guard lest you forget Yahweh your Elohim by not guarding his commands and his right rulings and his laws which I command you today, lest you eat and shall be satisfied and build lovely houses and dwell in them, and your herds and your flocks increase, and your silver and your gold increased, and all that you have is increased, and that your heart then becomes lifted up, and you forget Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, from the house of bondage, who led you through this through that great wilderness, great and awesome wilderness, fiery serpents and scorpions and thirst, where there was no water, who brought water for you out of the flinty rock, who led you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, in order to humble you and to try you, to do good to you in the end. You shall then say in your heart, my power and my strength and my hand have made me this wealth. You know what's sad? This happens every day. Every day, because people are led into the idea, oh, well, I was better off. We had the leaks and all that other stuff. I was better off in my Egypt. Now I'm trying to keep the Torah, and I keep losing jobs, and I can't pay the bills, and boy, are we confused. We're confused and don't understand what's real and what's not real, what's just part of the test and what's actually the real reality. You do not live in reality. Reality is what we're working towards. The kingdom is the only reality. This is the simulator field for us to learn how to be prepared to be in reality. You don't live in reality. We live in this world that's a proving ground, a testing ground, a learning, and a classroom. This is the ultimate classroom. So that when you graduate this class, you go to reality. I didn't say when you die, I just say when you graduate the class. You then are able to go to reality. That may be after you sleep for a while. We'll have to talk about that in another teaching. But understand that when the idea is to go to graduation, and the graduation sounds like this, so-and-so, and you come your name, well done, you good and trustworthy servant, enter into the rest of your master. That's what graduation sounds like. That's what graduation sounds like. This whole world, this whole journey is to get you everything you need to go through the process so that you can hear those words at the end. We want to be the ones that, in the sheep and the goats, where he says, blessed of my Father, come and sit at the right hand. But you see, that never is going to happen unless you know them. Because if you don't know them, you're not going to do what they say to do. You're going to mess this whole thing up because you need to know them to understand what they mean when they say something. My children, when I say certain things, if other children are around, those other children may not understand what I really meant the way my children will. Because you know why? They know me. My children know me. You guys here in the congregation that have been with us a year, 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it is, you may understand what I'm saying right now better than someone on the live stream or on the recording that's only hearing me for the first time because you know me. So you'll know what I mean when I say certain things, the certain words I use or the phrases I use, you'll know in a way that maybe they would not understand as well because they don't know me. Knowing makes a difference in understanding. You need to know to understand. You need to know in order to submit and be humble and all that. You can't do it truly unless you know that person. Wives, you've got to know your husbands. Otherwise, how can you submit to a husband? Husbands, you need to know your wives. Otherwise, how can you care for and provide for your wives? So that's why it talks about knowing the husband or knowing the wife. It says that Adam knew his wife. Well, we think of that meaning as a metaphor for sexual stuff. And yes, it probably is that too. But he knew his wife in every intimate possible way so that he understood and knew his wife. We have to get to know each other. And problem is, we still react to each other like we really don't know each other. And sometimes we react and the spouse will look at the other one like, I can't believe you would react to me that way. You should know me better than that. But you still react the way you do. There must be some part of this communication that's broken down that you don't know me well enough to know. What my needs are, how I like to be talked to, how I like to be addressed. You know, all of that stuff comes from knowing. Okay? You know, in some houses, for example, the way I'm talking right now would be considered screaming and yelling. Where I grew up, that was normal conversation tone. You grow up in a New York Jewish house, we're the Saturday Night Live Loud family, if anybody remembers that. The Loud family, I lived in the Loud family. We watched it going, look, they took us and put us on TV. My wife was laughing. She's been to that house. She knows. We're the Loud family. But the thing is, if you know me, you know this is not yelling. This is just me getting excited and animated about something I'm passionate about. Yelling sounds very different. But you see, if you don't know me, you're only doing it through your own filters. So now you're trying to get me to fit into your filters, which I can't. I'm me. You have to know me And then we can negotiate and work out how we can relate to each other. But you can't attribute to me or label things I do based on the way you would label them, because for me it may be very different. Does that make sense? So we don't know how to react to people sometimes because we don't know them. Guess what? The Father and Son are exactly the same way. How do you react to the Father and Son properly if you don't know them? But you know about them. You've heard of them. You've read about them. You have somewhat of a casual relationship, at least some of you think you've got this great relationship, but you know what? You thought that in the church, and you had no idea how much you didn't have a clue about really anything to do with what they really wanted. Oh, but I meet Christians all the time, and I'm not picking on them. They are blind and don't know. As far as they know, they're telling the truth. Make sure I'm clear on that. When they say to me, the Messiah and I are so close, that's the way they feel. And for them, that's very real. They have no idea how impossible that is to truly be true if you're breaking all His commandments. Because you can't. That's the sadness with which I pray them out of that system. I pray they get out of there so they can actually get to know the Son in reality. He's in reality, remember? We're not. So we need to understand Him the way He really is, not the way some system taught us about Him and lied to us and fed us lies and delusions and all that other nonsense. The system is despicable. It's a shameful system that lies to the people the way it does. The people need empathy, compassion, mercy, and sympathy because they're stuck in it. So were you. Praise Abba, He dragged you out of it. Some of you, He dragged out a little bit of kicking and screaming too. You didn't want to go. Some of you couldn't get out of there fast enough. It's just different for everybody. The point is, you need to know them. You need to know them, because otherwise, you know what happens? You start seeing, while in your disobedience, you start saying, oh, but look, I got wealth, and I've got herds, and cattle, and silver, and gold, and Abba must be blessing what I'm doing. Don't connect the dots in an incorrect way. Okay, don't connect those dots in an incorrect way. I was at a meeting one time, and every time the guy who was teaching stepped near this one potted plant, a horn honked outside. Because we're in a building in New York with a lot of traffic. And he would just be talking, and as he's talking, he'd walk back and forth. And every time he got near the pot, it just so happened 3 times in a row, a horn honked. We got to think that he's making a horn honk every time he goes by the pot. We're wrong. It's a bad connection to the dots. Just because coincidentally something happened 2 or 3 times doesn't mean that A led to B. So you broke the Sabbath, you took a job, you did some other thing, and you have all of this wealth, and it looks all good. You can't connect that breaking the Sabbath brought you the wealth. You can't connect that Yahweh blessed you because blessing seemed to have happened because you have more things. It's an illusion. It's a delusion. You're wrongly connecting dots. You can't connect those A to B's that way. By the way, eventually the guy, we all laughed at him, do us a favor, walk by the pot. He did, and nothing happened. We said, thank you. And then we could have moved on because we were distracted by this thing. Because it was very interesting. And we walk over, beep, beep, beep. Now, horns are honking all the time in New York, but it just so happened they weren't honking until he happened to walk over by the plant. So we said, please, just go over there. He's like, why? I said, just do it. And he walked over, nothing happened. So it was great. So it was good. Everybody could relax, and then we could move on. But you guys have to do that in your lives. Stop misconnecting the A's and B's. By the way, if you have trouble with that, that's why there are teachers, shepherds, and leaders in your congregation, in your assemblies, that you should also know them well enough to know whether or not you can trust them. Now, praise Yahweh, some of you have started to come to me and allow me to show you that I can be trusted. And so now that gives you the safe place where you can go and say, I'm connecting 2 dots. I'm not sure if I'm connecting them correctly. Can you help me with your insight? I'm not claiming I got perfect insight in everything. I'm telling you that I'm claiming is that I'm hoping that at that moment I can get out of the way and let Him say something through me. I try to just be the vessel. Because there's an expectation that the leader knows everything. I don't know everything. I don't know hardly anything. But when I open my mouth, the one who knows everything can put the words. Because He knows everything. The Father and the Son know everything, so they can put the words through the Ruach, and that could work out just fine. And then we both get to learn, you and me. Because I may learn something I can use in the next counseling session because I had no idea any of that stuff until I gave it to you. And we both get to learn. So he see here all this abundance going on, and we have this disconnect saying, oh, my wealth, my power, my hands made me this wealth. In verse 17, he says in verse 18, but you shall remember Yahweh your Elohim, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth in order to establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers as it is today. Now, did everybody catch all the subtleties in that verse? The purpose of wealth is to do what? Establish his covenant. So when all those guys tomorrow are on all the health and wealth gospel channels telling you that all of this wealth is for whatever they're trying to tell you it's for, they don't understand. He said all this stuff, the silver, the gold, the cattle, the crops, all this stuff, the houses, it's all in order to establish his covenant which he swore to your fathers as it is today. Why is the wealth there? Because he promised the wealth and abundance to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that obedience and submission and following his ways would lead to the wealth. So the wealth establishes the covenant. In other words, it proves, hey, I told you I would give you all of this stuff. And we're going to see that even more in Deuteronomy 28. It's not, we're not going to get there probably today because it is in the list of teachings. In this teaching, we're going to get to a little bit of Deuteronomy 28. But we can see that that was promised to establish his covenant. And so let's understand the purpose of wealth. It's not just so that you can have a lot of stuff. The purpose of wealth is so that you can understand it establishes your covenant, which means that it then strengthens your relationship with him, which means that then you can then share that with other people. Look, a lot of you are suffering poverty. I'm not judging any of you. You need to judge yourselves and go before the judge and say, Father, what is it I'm not doing that you're giving me all this poverty? Because a lot of the time, poverty is to get your attention. Because if he gave you all the abundance and you were doing all kinds of things wrong, how could you even think that you're doing anything wrong? Because you're connecting the dots again. I do this and I have this. Therefore, doing this brought that. Right? Isn't that what we do? If I'm doing this and I seem to get this result, we think that the thing I'm doing brought the result. That's true, and it's also not true. Remember Hebraic, it can be both. You did do things like maybe work on Saturday, which made you more money, which made you able to buy all this stuff. But that's not connecting the dot that I broke a law, I broke a commandment, and therefore I got all this stuff. You see, so that's how it's true and it's not true. It's true that what you did brought you the money to buy the stuff. What's not true is that you broke a commandment and that therefore you were blessed with the stuff. You see how it can be true and not true? A bad connecting of dots. So what he's saying here is, look, the abundance I give you is to establish that I am who I am, and when you do what's right and I give you blessing, then you know that that blessing came from me. And we're not trusting him. We're still not trusting him. We're not putting money in the box like we need to. We're not doing the Sabbath, not working thing like we need to. We're not, whatever it is, we're not trusting him. We're not trusting him. I think we all need to spend a year or two as full-out missionaries where you really have nothing unless he gives it to you. You know, what did Yeshua say? Do you remember what Yeshua said to them when he sent them out? He said, bring a nice big pack full of stuff and a money bag. Did he say any of that? What did he tell them to bring? Nothing. He told them to bring nothing. Could you imagine completely having to go out on faith and bringing nothing? Relying on Abba to open a door for you to have housing, food, clothes, whatever you need, because you bring nothing? You guys all have a lot more than nothing. But you're still suffering because you don't have what you want and what you need. As a matter of fact, some of you in the room have had this conversation with me where you said, I know I'm not poor. I've read magazines and watched TV and see what poor looks like. You guys have indoor plumbing that works. You guys have like wood, carpet, and stone floors and not dirt. I mean, poor looks a little different than what you guys have. The poorest people here in this country, by other places' standards, are wealthy. There are countries you can go to and you go to their supermarkets and there's like 4 items and 3 of them are sold out. You can walk in the cereal aisle and see 85 cereals and it's a whole aisle. I mean, like 85 varieties and there's like 16 boxes of each one. And if they run out, they got a whole warehouse in the back, it's got a whole nother bunch to put out there anyway. We have no idea how spoiled we are. And we don't thank Abba even for that what we have, because, oh, but it's not, well, we want more, because, I mean, the guy across the street's got more. All those people in the congregation that we know of have more. We got to remember, it is Yahweh your Elohim who gives you the power to get wealth. So if he gives you the power to get wealth and you don't have wealth, then you have a problem with him somewhere. I don't know what it is. I'm not judging you. You need to go to him and say, Abba, what is it that I'm not doing, since you're the one that has the power to get wealth, to establish your covenant? And it shall be, now here we're going to finally get to the connection to the voice. Look at verse 19 into 20. He says, and it shall be, if you by any means forget Yahweh your Elohim. By forget, it's not like, because he said it earlier, he says, and do not forget, in verse 14, it says that your heart becomes lifted up and you forget. It's not about forgetting like you don't remember Yahweh exists. It's forgetting who Yahweh is. Losing an understanding of knowing him in fullness. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? It's not like you forget that Yahweh exists or that there's a creator and all that stuff, but you start to forget that he's the guy who disciplines every son that he loves, he disciplines. You forget that there's a reaping and a sowing. You forget that he will not be mocked. You are going to reap what you sow. You forget that if you love him, you're going to guard his commandment. You forget that those who say they know him and not keep his commandment and don't keep his commandments are liars. You forget that stuff. He says, and it shall be, if you by any means forget all that stuff, if you do, then you might be tempted to do the next thing, which is follow other mighty ones and serve them and bow yourself to them. He says, I've warned you this day that you shall certainly perish. And by perish, it doesn't mean they're going to instantaneously die. It means, perish means you're not getting into the kingdom. Perish is dead, done, finished, annihilation, over. Perish. Not just die, perish. You're going to perish. Game over, that's it. No more lives, you don't get to read, no do-overs, that's over. He says, like the nations which Yahweh is destroying before you, so you shall to perish, because you did not, listen, because you did not obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim. See, all of this is going to lead up to obeying the voice of Yahweh your Elohim. Like the nations which Yahweh is destroying before you. He says to utterly destroy from the face of the earth these nations, right? That was part of the instruction. He's going to do the same to you. Why? Because you didn't obey the voice. But why would you not obey the voice? Because you forgot whose voice it was. You forgot the nature of the person. You forgot what type of person or what type of being he is. Because we want to think about this sort of Christian dichotomy of the ogre Old Testament Father God and the flower child, loving, gentle, everything is peace and love Son of the New Testament. Isn't that what they show you? Of course, it's the Son in both cases, in my opinion. And the Father hasn't been here since day one of creation, once he started the creation with the Son, putting that whole creation together. Once there was life and death and sin available on the planet, the Father said, it's all yours, my opinion, my delusion. And doesn't show up again until Revelation 21, when guess what? No more sin, no more death. It's all finished, it's clean. The Son hands him a clean, perfect thing. And so with this understanding, you can easily forget the nature of the one you're looking at, because you want to buy into this, peace, love, joy, whatever, flower child looking Yeshua from the movies, and forget that he's the same one that opened up the earth and swallowed up 23,000 in one day. He's the same one that says, you want meat, I'll give you meat till it's coming out of your nose. Same one. Same one, by the way, who flipped over the tables for the money changers. He showed a little bit of it over there. But he didn't come to do that when he came in the flesh. Oh, but he's coming. And he says he's coming with a rod of iron to rule. Oh, he's coming. And his reward is with him. By the way, the reward could be the good stuff or the bad stuff. That's the reward for what you do. When you do what you do, you earn a reward. But the reward may be the condemnation and wrath, like it says in Romans 2. He says, everyone will be judged according to his works, some to eternal life and some to condemnation and wrath. That's still a reward. You're going to get one or the other. You will have earned it, by the way. Don't have any doubts that you're going to get to say, but. No but. You will have earned whatever you get. Have no doubt of that. If you get good stuff, you'll have earned it. Oh, now you're talking earning salvation. Not at all. I'm talking about your reward. Salvation's been made available to everybody at the same time, regardless of what you do or don't do, it was made available. Your reward is going to be determined by what you earn by your actions. You do earn your reward. You deserve, in other words, you deserve what you get. How many times does it say things like walking worthily or doing something in a worthy manner? That has to do with earning something. Because you earn the idea of being worthy. I watch you, and I see what you're doing, and I decide that what you did was worthy of compensation, or worthy of a blessing, or worthy of punishment, or worthy of something. Worthy is something you earn. Your child does something, they get mad when they get punished, you say, well, you were worthy of this punishment. You earned it. Don't get mad at me. It was your choice. You knew what you were supposed to do, and you didn't do it. Or you knew what you weren't supposed to do, and you did it anyway. Therefore, the crime earned the punishment, or the punishment was worthy of the crime. Is this making sense? I mean, I hope this is really making sense. So when we get through all of this stuff in Deuteronomy 8, and we lead through all of these things that we're reading about the wilderness and the humbling and the commandments and guarding them and everything else, it all is to lead you to verse 20, where he says, like the nations which Yahweh is destroying before you, so you're going to perish if you don't, because you did not obey the voice. What's the voice? Yeshua is the voice. The Ruach is the voice. The commandments are they're all the same thing. I don't know how many times we have to go through it. They're the same thing. We've done the loop 100 times that Yeshua is the Torah. He is the Word made flesh. He is the truth. All of the stuff is the voice. He is the Spirit. It's the Spirit of what? The Spirit of truth. It's the Spirit of Yeshua. It's the Spirit that communicates on behalf of Yeshua. He says, I'm not going to leave you orphans. I'm coming to you. And He's going to make manifest to you everything that I want you to know. The Ruach will not speak of itself. We read that in John 16. And so this is what it's talking about. He is the voice. You don't get to hear the Father's voice directly. That's what Yeshua was saying. No one has ever at any time heard the Father's voice directly. Through the means of the Ruach, maybe. Through the means of the Son, absolutely. And when I said maybe on the Ruach, because maybe you were hearing the Son, not the Father. But either way, it still represents the Father, because what does Yeshua say? We said it earlier. Everything I say comes from the Father. So when you hear me, you hear Him. When you see me, you see Him. Didn't He tell us that over and over again? And so this is, again, with the voice. So let's understand that as we're going through this, that we're talking about Yeshua. We're talking about that voice. Let's go to chapter 9 and verse 23. I could sneak in one more here, I think. Chapter 9 of Deuteronomy. We'll stay in Deuteronomy here for today and next week, and we'll see how far we get. In verse 23, it says, and when Yahweh sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, go up and possess the land which I have given you, then you rebelled against the mouth of Yahweh your Elohim, and you neither trusted Him nor listened to His voice. So what was really going on here? Why did they not go in to possess the land? Because they didn't know Him. They didn't know Him well enough. If they had known Him, they would not have been afraid of what they saw. If they'd have known Him, they would not have been afraid of what they saw. Why are you afraid of the circumstances that face you? Are they any greater than what they saw with the giants and the walls that were like grasshoppers in their eyes and all of these things that they saw? Why can't you trust Him? Well, because you don't really know Him as well as you think you do. You just don't. I'm not trying to offend you and insult you. Oh, don't tell me I don't know. Well, I am telling you you don't know. If you do those things, you prove that you don't know. Because you can't do those things if you really know Him. Does that make any sense? If you truly had the relationship with Him that knowing means, it's relational, you could not do that. You can only do those things if you truly don't have that fullness of relationship. You know a lot about Him. You have a partial relationship with Him. You have a lot of information. You have a lot of experience. But you haven't gotten to that fullness of relationship, which is why you keep doing what you keep doing. There's no other way around it. There's no other explanation for the behavior. Listen to what he says here. He says, look, I said to you, go up and possess, and then you rebelled against the mouth. How could you rebel against the mouth unless you didn't trust and believe and know? They didn't rebel because they'd rather have something else. This wasn't like, I want to give you chocolate ice cream, and you say, no, I'd rather have a cookie. This was, I want to give you this place, and you say, I'm afraid, I don't think I want to go. That's a whole different thing. They rebelled because they didn't trust, not because they had a preference, I'd rather go this other place. They didn't say, I'm sorry, your land didn't look so good to us, I like this other place over here a lot better. That's not what they said. They said, hey, we go over there, we're going to die. We're going to get killed. It's scary over there. We have no shot. I mean, there's giants over there, for crying out loud. They're just going to squash us, and giant walls and all these. We're just a bunch of, former slaves who don't know our elbow from our knee or anything, What do we know about all this stuff? We've been free from slavery for like 5 seconds. But they didn't know who was bringing them, who was leading them, that he would go before them, that he would take care of all of that. I don't know why. I mean, after all, he wiped out the entire nation of Egypt, the greatest nation in their area, probably the greatest nation in the world at the time. I mean, he laid complete waste of it while they were all cowering in their rooms in Goshen. And if that wasn't enough, he split a sea while they were right behind him, ready to kill them. That certainly was scary enough. I mean, they certainly had death facing them from behind and no place to go. But yet they still didn't know him. How many miracles does he have to do in your life for you to trust him? How many? And don't tell me he hasn't done any. You've all talked to me. I know he's done them. And even if you didn't talk to me, I know he's done them. Your being here right now, listening to me, sitting in this room is a miracle. Because you could have still been in wherever you were, in those churches or in atheists, wherever. You could have just been in the world somewhere. And some of you were pretty well versed in that world when you were in the world. Some of you led some lives that you won't tell people about right now. We all have. So it's a miracle that you're here. It's a miracle that he chose to reveal, the Father chose to reveal the Son to you, and the Son chose to reveal the Father to you. It's a miracle that he chose to give you ears to see, eyes to hear, ears to hear, eyes to see, and a heart to receive. I always mess that up at least once. But it's the miracle that he gives you these things. The opportunity you have to keep the commandments is a miracle. The whole world system is actually all put in place to keep you from that. So to do it, it takes a miracle. In a world completely designed to keep you away from it, that you found your way to it, that's a miracle. I don't know what you think of a big miracle, small miracle. A miracle's a miracle. I don't know how you categorize them. To me, they're all the same. In other words, without the Creator's intervention, you wouldn't be where you are or have what you have. That's a miracle. And so, do we take that for granted? Or do we make the effort to get to really know him? Because listen to what he says now in the next verse. He says, not only, we'll go back to the previous verse, it says, then you rebelled against the mouth of Yahweh, your Elohim, you neither trusted him nor listened to his voice. So he's showing you that the reason you don't listen is because you don't trust. There's a connection there. He wanted you to hear that part, not just about the voice part, which he mentioned in other verses, but the trusting part. But how can you trust somebody if you don't know them? I don't know you, how can I trust you? What do we teach children? You can't go and talk to strangers and go anywhere with strangers. Why? Because you don't know them, which means you can't trust them and you're not safe. You have to know someone to trust them and to be safe. He says, look, you didn't trust me. He says, you didn't trust Yahweh, your Elohim. You didn't listen to his voice. You didn't trust him. He says, and the reason is, he says, listen to verse 21, he says, you have been rebellious against Yahweh from the day that I knew you. So why is that? It goes back to Deuteronomy 8:2. We're not humble enough. They were not humble enough. The generation that died in the desert was not humble enough to go into the land. They could have been in the land in a number of weeks. It doesn't take 40 years to walk from Egypt to the land. I don't care how slow you walk, it doesn't take 40 years. He punished them because they would not trust him. And he needed them to learn to trust him. So how would he do it? He says, I'm going to give you 40 years of relying on everything from me. And then what would happen? Once they got in the land, they started building cities in Deuteronomy 8, all played out. They got cities and houses and silver and gold, and what did they do? They forgot about them. And then Isaiah had to come, and Jeremiah had to come, and all these warnings had to come and tell them, you better shape up. If you don't shape up, you're out of here. Because they forgot about him. Everything Yahweh says in Deuteronomy 8 came true, exactly what he said. He said, I warned you and you didn't listen. Why? Because you were rebellious, you weren't humble enough. And why weren't you humble enough? Because you really didn't know who you were dealing with. And so my encouragement to all of us is, do we really know who we're dealing with? Oh, how many times do you see that in the movies where the person is all tough? He goes, do you know who you're talking to? Oh, they get all tough. Do you know who you're speaking to? And the person's like, no, who am I speaking to? Do you understand that I could squash you like a fly? I could snuff out your life. With one word, you could be dead. Isn't that what you see in the movies? I mean, do you know you're talking to me? You're talking to me? Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? That's what you hear in the movie. Do you know who I am? No, who are you? Well, the Father's saying the same thing. He's saying, do you know who I am? I can give you all the blessings that you ever could imagine and beyond whatever you could imagine. But I could also end your life tomorrow. Do you know who I am? Do you know me? And if you do, don't ever forget. If you do, don't ever forget. Because it's not only knowing, but it's the holding on to that knowing. And walking in that knowing. And trusting in that knowing that's going to make all the difference. Amen? Let's go before the Father. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, King Father, we come before you. And Father, we really want to know you. We want to know that we know. We want to have that relationship. We want to have that depth of intimacy where we know you and we can trust you and we can be truly submitted fully to you and we can get rid of all the lack of humility, the lack of humbleness. We want to get rid of all that self-sovereignty, all that me, I don't like, I don't want, I don't think it's fair, that's not, but. Father, take that away from us. Help us to get rid of all of that stuff and to fully trust in you. To trust and rely on you, to know that you are the one that gives us the power to create wealth, that all the good things ultimately come from you, and that if we get them on our own, then they're really not real, that it's short-lived, short-term. Because when we know that all wealth comes from you, we're talking about wealth, not things. Things, we can do on our own power, we can get things. It's not hard for people all over the world are always getting things. But that's not wealth. We know wealth is the treasure we treasure up in heaven, wealth. Abundance that comes from blessing from you, that's wealth. Help us understand the difference between wealth and things, stuff, so that we can appreciate the difference. Father, we want to know you. We want to understand what your plan is. We want to guard your commandments and trust that they're going to keep us safe and bless us and transform us into your image. Father, we want to obey and listen and submit to your voice, the voice of Yeshua, the voice of the Torah, through the Ruach HaKodesh. We want to hear your voice through them. And we want to listen and obey. We want to hear and obey. We want to listen and do what you're telling us through your voice. We do not want to rebel against the mouth of you, Almighty. We do not want to lack our trust in you. We don't want to forget who you are. Help us to never forget. Father, we bless you and we thank you. We praise you and glorify your name as we lay before you as humbly as we can our desire to become like you. And so we ask in the authority of your Son, in his name, the one who speaks for you, he being your voice, our high priest, our older brother, our soon-coming king, and it's in his name, in the name of Yeshua, the name above all names, that we implore you, we beseech you, we plead with you in mercy and compassion that you would grant us the heart to trust and never forget and to truly get to know you. So, Father, in Yeshua's name we ask these things, and together we say, Amen, Amen.